to lunch, I have just a few housekeeping announcements. And the first is I want to congratulate the winners of our posters. We had the doctorate level posters, and the first prize goes to Haley Emerson, whose poster was on improving opportunities for end-of-life decision-making. The second place doctorate level poster went to Jake Sanders for implementation of AOPB in family medicine clinic. And third prize went to Dr. Laura Give for reducing errors in physician order handoffs.
Listen up.
And then for our undergraduate level posters, the first prize went to Jason Rowe, Travis Henderson, and Ryan Fulmer, and their topic was the effects of cannabidiol on post-inflammatory cytokines. Second place went to Gabrielle Krull, and his poster was the role of anti-hyperglycemic drugs on breast cancer progression. And the third place poster went to Tyler Chappell, Austin Maxfield, and Jared Laney, and their poster was on biofilm reduction in simulated cystic fibrosis lungs using novel methods. Again, our poster winners and all of our poster participants are to be congratulated for the hard work and effort that went into their posters. I also want to extend heartfelt thanks to the Utah Medical Association Financial Services. They are sponsoring our lunch, and they are also sponsoring Dr. Gunderman's upcoming presentation. The UMA Financial Services has worked with the Ogden Surgical Medical Society for some time, and they have given us great advice and great peace of mind regarding our finances. Are there any members from Utah Medical Association Financial Services out in the audience? Let's give them a hand. And then I would also like to extend heartfelt thanks to Child Richards CPA and advisors. They help the society with our annual audit as well as our taxes. And I don't know if anyone from Child Richards is with us. But anyway, we express our gratitude to them. As we have our lunch, we're going to hear from Patrick Brady from Utah Medical Association Financial Services. Patrick has worked as a financial consultant since 1997, and in 2000 he brought his substantial experience with high-value clients or high net worth clients to the Utah Medical Association Financial Services. He graduated cum laude with an economics degree from the University of Utah, and he's a chartered retirement plan specialist and an accredited investment fiduciary. He's committed to providing unbiased advice and to help us members of Utah Medical Association meet our financial goals. And if I could invite Patrick up.
So while you're standing in line, I'm going to try and go fast through this, but I'm going to give you one of your favorite movies, I'm sure, to watch for 3 minutes. And what I'd like you to do, for those that notice, I want you to compare that not to the rocket building business, but to the stock market is the idea. So here we go.
Team flight controllers, listen up. Give me a go, no go for launch. Booster.
Go.
Retro.
Go.
Vital.
We're go flight.
Guidance.
Guidance go.
Surgeon.
Go flight.
Ecom.
We're go flight.
GNC.
We're go.
Telmu.
Go.
Control.
Go flight.
Procedures.
Go.
Inco.
Go.
FAO.
We are go.
Network.
Go.
Recovery.
Go.
Capcom.
We're go flight.
Launch control, this is Houston. We are go for launch.
Roger that, Houston. Pad
flight leader. What's your status?
We are go for launch. T-minus 60 seconds and counting.
Fuel pumps. This is it. A few bumps and we're hauling the mail.
We are go for launch. T-minus
15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. Ignition sequence start. 1. Ignition.
All right. There's a correlation. Now, first of all, I want to say it's hard to follow Scott speaking, and he deserves all of the attention of this entire room from that experience. If maybe the stock market fell in half today, I might get more attention out of this experience. But it did not, fortunately. So, unfortunately, we get to use the term, it's almost back to its all-time high. Matter of fact, it's just about, the Dow Jones is just about 0.5% from its all-time high. So that scare that we got on Friday and Monday didn't quite have the effect that a lot of people thought it would, and it was going to continue, and that was going to be the precipice to tilt everything. What's unique about this, and the reason I want to show this while you're eating lunch, is because this is how people feel when they're about to retire. This is a scary experience. They have prepared for it for a long time. They've saved a lot of money, and they're relying upon not 4 rocket boosters and the technology of all these great men and women who designed this, but they're deciding to really support their future based upon the stock market and the economy of the globe, policymakers around the world, how votes are cast, and it's a scary experience. And we are right now about to hit the longest economic expansion since post-Civil War. So if we go to July, it is the longest expansion that we will have. And that's unique because we're not used to expansions that long in this room. No one in this room has lived through an expansion this long. And so we're all about to experience something that no one has, and that is, what do you do when we go into month 121? The next thing is that we have to worry about is on that expansion, when does it start to slow down? So I would compare the expansion more to this picture. The expansion is about the same as a nice married couple. They grow up, they get married, they start to get old, and eventually we're not sure how long they're going to live. But around 85, which is about what the market is right now, it's extremely long market, and also the economic system. It's not ready to die necessarily, but it could die at any day. And so we have to wonder, is it going to live until the age of 96, or is it going to live until the age of 86 if it's 85 years old? What you need to do, though, are a few things. And in the few minutes I have, all I wanted to do was give you some perspective that was academic so that you didn't start to panic the moment that a red dot showed up on your Fidelity account. It doesn't mean the world's coming to an end. But it is important to know why we think the economy can still continue at some level. So last week we knew that the economy reached a year-over-year growth at 3.1%. So the GDP was higher than somewhat expected, but it's really chugging along. Now that's carrying along from last year. And for those of you that are wondering what a GDP really means, it means the economy is on full steam. We are really, last year it has worked exceptionally well. Now there's some tax cuts that came in that gave it some push. About 77% of the tax cuts went to the consumer. It's not a political statement, that's just a fact. The consumer had a tendency to spend those tax cuts. Those tax cuts generally start to run out, and it doesn't create long-term growth, but it does create stimulus. And then it went on a little longer because your gas prices went down, and that's essentially a tax cut to the consumer because that's real dollars they can go spend somewhere else. So that's pushed us a little bit longer, but most economists are saying that somewhere at the end of the year, we're going to start hitting a 1% and then back to 2%. And we could stay at a 2% for a little while, just like we did for years getting up to this point. So the 2% growth isn't terrible. It's definitely not negative. And that means that you could have a sustained program that could go on an economic expansion for possibly another 12 months. Now, that doesn't mean that the stock market isn't going to do some weird things. But there are some things to control the market. And the one I highlight, there's 4 things that are really causing this GDP, the expansion to keep going. So not only is GDP hitting, but you also have consumer debt. So consumer debt, I hear all the time from the physicians, they'll say, I'm really worried that we're back in the same position we were in 2008. And they're correlating home prices to the debt crisis we went through. And they're not necessarily correlated. So the home prices are up 14% in Utah. We were the second highest state. It was announced on Friday. Idaho beat us in the United States over the last 1 year period. So we really have had some high escalation, but the consumer debt levels have not increased where they were back in 2008. They're much lower. So that gives some stability, and you might be noticing that in your credit cards. But the most interesting thing on this whole screen is this, and that's inflation. So inflation is a fascinating number because that's what the feds are using to kind of judge whether or not they're going to raise interest rates. We need an unemployment rate that's low, and we need an inflation rate that's stable. So for those of you that have any interest in economics whatsoever, typically when you get a low employment rate, you start to get high inflation. They are correlated together over time. But there's something weird happening, and we are not getting inflation. A little wage inflation started to show up recently, but not a lot. Economists will say there's a couple of reasons. One of the reasons is that the purchasing capacity we have today is very competitive. So how many of you remember when you had to call your travel agent to get a competitive price on a ticket? Now we can be on our phones, we can get a competitive price to go anywhere in the world in about 30 seconds. And it's ranked, and we can push buy. And so we've changed how we can be competitive relative to the consumer. For those of you who are paying attention, I am going to ask you one question to raise your hand. How many of you got an Amazon package this week at your house? How many of you have Prime membership? There's another example of inflation controlling. It's a mechanism that we can go out and compete in pricing. And that means the supply chain gets a little flat. And so you don't run out of product as much, and also pricing can be more stable. But what's really more interesting is this data. Back in the 1970s, the top 10% of the tax wage earners in the United States controlled about 35% of the wealth. Top 10%. That's probably everyone in this room. Today, the top 10% control more than 50% of the wealth. The challenge on that is those of us in this room, we only spend about 73% of every dollar that we actually earn. The rest of the 90%, who have less of the money, they spend 102% of every dollar that they earn. Where does the $2 come from? Debt. So what's happening is more money is being shifted to people that don't spend as much money. And it's a unique thing that's happening in the world right now, particularly in the United States is where it's happening the most. And so you can get some lower inflation because of purchasing changes taking place by the top 10% of wage earners in the United States. So there is now the long-term forecast just dropped on inflation by another 0.25%. Since 1970, inflation was average like 3.9%. Now we're thinking it's going to be much closer to 2%. That data is pretty significant. And what is significant is you who are currently retired do not have to worry as much on taking more money out every single year so that your money can last longer. All right, I'm going to play the next clip in relationship to the economy.
Taxes and the Fred Hayes show, I'd say that was a pretty successful broadcast.
Next one, show up.
Thank you very much, Houston.
We got a couple of housekeeping procedures for you. We'd like you to roll right to 060 and know your rates.
Roger that. Rolling right. 060.
And then if you could give your oxygen tanks a stir.
Roger that. Hey, we've got a problem here.
What did you do?
Nothing. I stirred the tanks.
Whoa. Hey. This is Houston. Say again, please.
Houston, we have a problem. We have a main bus B undervolt. We've got a lot of thruster
What's the
activity
story
here,
with the computer
Houston.
now?
It just went offline. Oh, there's another master alarm, Houston.
I'm checking the quad.
Christ, that was no repress valve.
Maybe it's in quad
We've
C.
got a computer
I'm
restart.
gonna reconfigure the RCS.
We've got a
Where these
pink
things
light.
fire doesn't make any
We
sense.
got multiple caution and warning, Houston. We've got a reset for restart.
All right, I'm going to SDS.
Jesus. Flight, the heart rates are skyrocketing. Ecom, what's your data telling you?
O2 tank 2 not reading at all. Tank 1 is at 725 psi and falling. Fuel cells 1 and 3 are oh boy, what's going on here? Flight, let me get back to you. Flight GNC? Flight, they're all over the place. They keep yawing close to gimbal lock.
I keep losing radio signal. Flight, their antenna must be flat.
22, they're gonna have to do it manually if they do
One at
it
a
all.
time, people. One at a time. One at a time. Ecom, is this an instrumentation problem, or are we looking at real power loss here?
It's reading a quadruple failure. That can't happen. It's got to be instrumentation.
Let's get that hatch button. The limb might have been hit by a meteor.
Yep.
The tunnel's really torquing with all the fluid. Houston, we got a pretty large bang there associated with a master alarm. Shit, it's main bus A.
Main bus A undervolt.
Houston, we have a main bus A undervolt now, too. It's reading 25 and a half. Main bus B is reading zip right now. We got a wicked shimmy up here.
Ecom, GNC, these guys are talking about bangs and shimmies up there. Doesn't sound like instrument.
All right. So that seems a little bit dramatic relative to the market, but I guarantee that that's how some of you react when the market starts to do some strange things. Since 1900, the S&P 500 has dropped almost, and I'm saying almost in a 98% likelihood. 98% of the time, the S&P 500 has dropped every year. So this is the measles chart I like to show. This is the updated measles chart. And you can see from 1980, every year, on average, it's dropped about 14% inter-year. But it's averaged 8.8% over the entire cycle. And so the point of this is just get ready for Houston, we have a problem. And it's going to happen. When you get more nervous is when you start to retire or you're about to retire. And I want to talk about that for a few minutes because no matter how old you are, you need to understand mathematically in whatever period of time we're dealing with, the first 5 years of your retirement are some of the most critical relative to the market, if that's where your exposure is, and the first 5 years before are very critical, but really those 5 years can mathematically change everything in your life if you're not careful. So you want to make sure there's the things that you can control, you're controlling. And they're up on the left quadrant. And that is you're controlling your spending and you're controlling your allocation. So as the market has gone so long in relationship to its expansion, what's really hard to do, despite people saying I'm going to do it, is to do a reset. And it's really hard to get you to go in and do a reset back to a number that's realistic, because you're afraid of one of two things. One is the market's going to fall and you're going to lose everything, and what does a reset really look like for your stage of life? The other one is, if I'm wrong, what am I going to miss out on? But generally, the reset period is very critical as you get into this retirement stage, because there's this old rule, and I'm sure you've either read it on an airplane. I like to call Money Magazine financial pornography. You've read it on there, and it's like told you you've got to do this 4% rule on the withdrawal. The 4% rule is not working as well as a lot of analysts have told us for years. Matter of fact, we're dropping it. We're dropping the 4% rule closer to around 3.5% is your withdrawal rate. But what this chart shows is, historically, that your portfolio needs to be, and I'm going to walk, our industry gets a little bit of fault for not being able to project the future. But what we can do is tell you that we can test mathematically what's happened for years now with big data. And so we can give these probabilities of success pretty accurately relative to what we think can happen in the future. We just can't tell you exactly when all those sequences are going to take place. So go to your advisor or go to someone. You're welcome to come to UMA Financial Services. We'll help you. This is not a plug. We're here to help, but go to someone and start figuring out the math. Do not assume that your own spreadsheet at home is right. I can't tell you how many times I meet with someone. I know all the advisors in our office do. You guys are brilliant. We honor you, just like what Scott talked about. We really do. But your spreadsheets are often missing some key components, and those key components are inflation and what in our business is sequence of return risk. Sequence of return risk means there's a volatility problem taking place. So this gives you a kind of an idea of that withdrawal rate of 4%, 5%, and 6%. What this takes into account, though, is what's called sequence of return risk. This means at the very beginning of your retirement, the world was bad financially. Look at the big difference it had versus the end. So if the markets are having a rough day for 3 years and you're just retired, the way you have to strategize that plan is to make sure you have enough in cash for those 3 years that you're not touching any of your assets relative to market exposure. You're going to the bank and you're saying, I'm using this money that's earning almost nothing, but it's going to get me through the next 3 years of volatility that I cannot handle. Because if I start taking, we call it feeding the bear. If there's a bear market and you feed that by taking more money out as your portfolio falls, think of the math. If you lose 50% of your portfolio, you don't have to get 50% back to get back to normal. You have to get 100% higher. So you have to mathematically go much farther than you fell to get back to normal. And you have to do it in a short period of time. The way to protect against that is by doing some cash reserves that are super heavy. Now, if you're younger, stay invested in the market. This is showing sequence of return risk, and I really want to show my last little clip at the end to finish off. This is showing two charts that are 5% rate of return in the end, but you can see that the blue one is saying things were really good when they started investing, and then 30 years later, things were bad at the end. Or the bottom, it was things were bad at the beginning, good at the end. The number still came out at 1.3 relative to a 5%. But this chart shows withdrawals. So in the same scenario, if you're going through that bad sequence, so you have a bad start but a great end, you run out of money if you're doing if you're pulling money out at the same time. If, though, you're saving and you have a good end at the top, so if you have a really you have a great finish. That's if you're saving. So you really have to think about how dynamic your portfolio needs to be in how dynamic your spending needs to be when things aren't going well. So my last bit of advice. When you are doing your math and you're saying, okay, I'm going to pull out 4% and I got to do $10,000 a month if it was today, I've got to keep up with inflation. Make certain that you are a prudent individual, that every single year when the markets aren't doing well, and if you don't have any alternative cash flow streams like through real estate or other options, that you reduce your spending during those rough times of the economy and do not live on the same amount. Just go back to normal human being behavior, that when money doesn't come in at your job like you thought it was, you stop spending. Don't go into debt. So in retirement, it's very hard to pay off a credit card because generally things are fixed expense. All right. If you do good planning, this last clip will tell you exactly what will happen in your life, and you'll have a great outcome. Thank you for allowing us to support Ogden Surgical Medical Society. We love it. We've done it for years. It's one of our best marketing dollars spent. The Medical Association hit $1 billion this year. We are the 5th largest investment company in the state of Utah, registered investment advisory firm out of 2,000. We appreciate the Medical Association that owns us, their support. They're fantastic for us, and it's great serving all of you. And here's the clip.
Odyssey, this is Houston. Do you read?
The expected time of reacquisition, the time when the astronauts were expected to come out of blackout, has come and gone. But all any of us can do now is just listen and hope. We're about to learn whether or not that heat shield, which was damaged, as you remember, by the explosion 3 days ago, has withstood the inferno of reentry.
Odyssey, this is Houston. Do you read me? Odyssey, Houston, do you read me?
3 minutes, 30 seconds, stand by.
Odyssey, Houston, do you read me? Odyssey, this is Houston. Do you read me?
That's 4 minutes, standing by.
Odyssey, Houston, do you read?
Hello, Houston. This is Odyssey. It's good to see you again.
Odyssey, Houston, welcome home. We're glad to see you.
That's generally the outcome that you'll have in your life. If you do well, you put good advisors around you. And just save. Really, just be wise. Remember, you're going to have more power from your saving capacity that you can control than the fear you're going to have of the markets. It's something you can always control. And control your spending as well. Those are good principle things, and make sure that you don't panic and start screaming, Houston, we have a problem, when in reality it's probably going to be okay. Thanks.